A long time ago, a small space station ended up in deep space near a lifeless planet called Dante and received the same name. It served as a space prison and psychiatric center for especially dangerous criminals from Earth. One day, a shuttle arrives and delivers a frozen man who awakens from hypersleep, severely disoriented and unable to speak. Then a new scientist named Eliza arrives here. The woman listens to greetings from Station Chief Karen. Later, she goes to the control center and recognizes the people who are being held here. All of them are not just criminals, but also patients whose affairs she studied very well. Now the woman will test a new technology on them that allows them to recognize criminal tendencies in people and cure them. She is introduced to the psychiatrist Persephone, who talks about the rules of their small world. At this time, the arriving prisoner is brought to a closed part of the station, where he finds clothes and tries to understand where he ended up. Karen shows Eliza all the movements of the man who is about to meet the inhabitants of the closed part. One of the prisoners, Rasputin, comes out to meet the newcomer. He grabs the staggering man by the arms and calls him a savior because he is St. George, the slayer of dragons. But the main one among the prisoners, whose name is Caesar, cannot understand why he got this, because there are no dragons here, and how can he know the name of the unknown man? Then Rasputin shows the leader the tattoo on the newcomer's forearms, the sign of a saint slaying a serpent with a spear. But the leader warns Rasputin to be careful and tries to interrogate the newcomer himself. But Caesar can't do anything either, because the man still can't speak. Meanwhile, Karen asks Attila, who is an excellent hacker and at the same time his informant, to check Eliza's strange appearance through his channels. At this time, the new guy is brought into a common cell. Caesar introduces him to the prisoners. The largest is Moloch, the second is Lazarus. The newcomer listens to the words of the leader, but it is not entirely clear whether he realizes what the conversation is about. At this time, Persephone leads Eliza into a room from where the prisoners' conversations can be heard. Unfortunately, it is impossible to install a video camera without the prisoners noticing. At this moment, the prisoners knock on the cell of Buddha, a serial killer who often meditates alone. They invite him to talk to the new guy, but he doesn't open the door. Eliza tells Persephone that a new guy was found on a shipwrecked ship. He does not remember his name or what happened. He was brought to Dante to test new treatments on him. Meanwhile, Caesar gives the new guy a card with which he can get food, and the others tell him to hide it from the insatiable Moloch. The big man doesn't like these jokes, which causes a conflict, but Caesar stops the fight because prisoners can be punished with sleeping gas, which then gives them a severe headache. Persephone, who saw this, explains to Eliza that no one appointed Caesar in charge, but the overseers are grateful to him for maintaining order among the prisoners. Meanwhile, the newcomer is trying to understand what is happening to him, but strange spots of color and some visions appear before his eyes. Buddha nevertheless comes to him, who understands that the man is in pain and, in accordance with his habits, begins to choke him in order to relieve his suffering. Then the others come running and drag the maniac away. Caesar scolds the killer, but he breaks free and runs away. The others begin to look for him, but the overseers decide to end the conflict with gas. Eliza suggests making Buddha the first test subject. She intends to inject him with a nanotechnology product, which, according to the creators, should eliminate DNA dysfunction that leads to a thirst for violence. But Persephone speaks out sharply against it and refuses to participate in human trials. However, after waiting until all the prisoners fall asleep, the guards take Buddha from the prison compartment and transport him to the laboratory. Eliza injects him with the substance and monitors the prisoner's well-being. He reacts very violently, although he is in an unconscious state. Then Eliza orders to return him to the closed area. Having regained consciousness, the prisoner begins to experience severe pain. But St. George comes to the rescue and somehow removes foreign organisms from his body. He sees them as some kind of energetic creatures, and then he eats them. Buddha comes to his senses and recovers. Meanwhile, Eliza reminds Persephone that the criminals have signed an agreement with the pharmaceutical company and must now endure what is happening. But the professor is against any experiments on people, even those convicted of atrocities. At this time, Attila hacks into Elisa's files and learns that the company allowed her to do everything for the sake of their research. Meanwhile, St. George continues to experience painful conditions with visions. Lazarus, with the help of a barrel of water, develops the ability to hold his breath in order to avoid the effects of the gas used to sedate prisoners. Persephone understands that only one of her teammates has a chance to change the situation, because the rest, including her, simply will not survive. Karen also understands this and comes to Eliza to report that the company no longer trusts the old psychologist Persephone, but the girl does not make contact. Later, Attila calls Karen and asks him to give him his password for the system. Then he will be able to give the boss much more information. Meanwhile, a scandal starts in the common cell. Buddha intends to protect his savior from any attacks because he considers him an angel. Caesar doesn't like this and gives Moloch the order to teach him a lesson. The big man attacks, but suddenly Rasputin intervenes in the fight, as a result of which Moloch accidentally wounds himself in the neck. Gas begins flowing inside to disable the prisoners again. St. George runs up to the man covered in blood and tries to do something with him, after which he loses consciousness. The prison guards burst in and discover that Moloch has no wound and is healthy. Persephone shows everyone the data from the equipment, proving that the prisoner was dying. But Eliza does not believe in a miracle and orders to inject the substance to Caesar. Later, he is transferred to the prison section. The leader comes to his senses and begins to insist on killing the new guy. But Moloch refuses to do this. Then Lazarus comes forward, who fears that the new guy will seize power because Caesar is getting worse. St. George is also overcome by a wave of pain, and Rasputin goes to get a blanket for him. But Caesar's cronies attack the man. Lazarus enters the newcomer's cell and stabs him several times. However, when the staff examines the corpse, Georgie turns out to be alive, although he has lost almost all his blood. Persephone tries to stop Eliza from injecting him with the substance, but Karen suspends the psychologist from work. Persephone asks to understand that the firm intends to obtain the saint's DNA and kill him. But the boss says that as soon as Eliza gets everything she needs, they will fly away from here and kill everyone else. At this moment, Persephone realizes that this was all planned in advance. At this time, the saint wakes up completely healed. He grabs Eliza and uses her as a hostage to get to the prison premises. Karen announces the alarm and opens the doors. Then the saint releases the woman and goes into the prison area. The girl hits the boss because he didn't check the belts on the man's hands. At this time, Karen is called by Attila and says that he has programmed Dante alone to collide with the planet, so that soon everyone will die. Caesar begins to experience unbearable pain, but the saint heals him too. He brings out the luminous creatures and eats them. The leader comes to his senses and does not believe his eyes, because he was assured that he was dead. The saint says that he saw the light, but is immediately overcome by a twinge of pain. Suddenly, an alarm sounds, and Attila reports an impending explosion so that no one will be able to save them. The convict escapes, and while the others catch him, the overseers decide how they can escape. Since the shuttle can only accommodate 2 people, they can restart the system, but this can only be done from the other side of the ship. Meanwhile, the prisoners find Attila hanged in the mine and realize that there is no escape. But suddenly, they are called by Karen, who reports that the only way to save the station is to activate the manual controls located under the prisoners' cabins. The prisoners agree to let the staff through, but Elisa refuses to accompany the others into the prison area. Karen and his men enter the prisoner's room. The man cannot cope with his anger, but the boss manages to suppress the rebellion, because otherwise they will all burn. All of the station's occupants work together to open the hatch, but then the gas is turned on, putting everyone to sleep except Lazarus. At this time, Eliza prepares to escape on the shuttle, but Lazarus ambushes her, forcing her to let him into the shuttle. He intends to fly away with her and become free. When the others wake up, Karen learns of Eliza's betrayal. One of the guards sees that Attila has done something with the shuttle's controls, as a result of which the shuttle burns up in the planet's atmosphere. The others finally open the hatch and discover that the cooling system is overheated. Now the corridor that leads to the manual controls is filled with boiling coolant. Caesar realizes that he is the only one thin enough to fit in this space and decides to take it upon himself to save everyone. Karen tells him the code for the system and wraps the man in protective fabrics. Then he goes down the hatch. Caesar manages to swim down the corridor. He comes out the other side, but receives burns that are incompatible with life and dies before he can enter the code. No one ever found out who St. George was or where he came from. The man puts on a spacesuit and goes into outer space, where he soars above the planet. Using his inexplicable abilities and the mysterious energy creatures that are now inside him, he transforms Dante into a habitable planet, after which his body disintegrates in space.